Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this information sharing session on Mexican wolf management. My name is Phil Sang. I'm president of DJ Case and Associates and moderator for tonight's session. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has contracted with DJ Case and Associates to provide logistical support and facilitation for tonight's meeting. I'm joined this evening by Rick Clausen, also from DJ Case, who is helping to look after the meeting platform and technical issues for tonight's session. Aside from Rick and me, everyone else you'll see and hear at tonight's session is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we will introduce them shortly. But first, since we are meeting in the virtual space instead of in person, I'd like to take a few minutes to explain how this session is going to work. So if you're joining us online, you'll see the agenda for our meeting, and I'm covering the first item now by explaining the format and the ground rules for tonight's session. Next, representatives from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will introduce themselves and give an overview of the session. Then Amy Luters, who's Regional Director for Interior Regions 6 and 8, will provide opening remarks to set the stage. Following that, Tracy Melbahes, who's the Mexican Wolf Policy Coordinator, will give an overview of the proposed rule. And then we'll get to the primary reason for tonight's meeting, which is to take your questions about the proposed changes to the rule. Quick reminder that this evening's session is not a public hearing. That is, we're not accepting formal comments on the proposed rule. Those hearings and opportunity for public comment will be held on December 8th and January 11th, and you'll hear more about that in the presentation this evening. But this evening, we're very interested in hearing whatever questions you may have about any aspects of the Mexican wolf proposed rule. That's really what we're here for. We're on a Zoom webinar tonight, so we have a few quick ground rules to pass along. First, the session is being recorded, and a transcript will be posted on the Mexican Wolf Recovery website within 3 business days. So if you know anyone who could benefit from this information but couldn't participate today, please share the link, which we will post shortly. Participant microphones and video are turned off for this presentation. We'll take questions and provide answers for about 60 minutes, however much time is left after the presentation, until 7:30 p.m. Mountain Time. If you have questions after the presentation, please submit them one at a time by clicking the Q&A button, which you can find at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar. Please submit multiple questions in a single screen. That makes it really difficult to manage the Q&A session. Please be respectful when asking questions. We don't anticipate any problems here, but note that if you use profanity or inappropriate language, we reserve the right to dismiss the question and move on. If you're joining us on the phone tonight, we'll have separate instructions for how to ask your questions at the beginning of the Q&A session after the presentation. If you need it, captioning is available. You can view that by clicking on the CC button on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And the posted recording will also be captioned if that's helpful for you to review it again later. I know that's a lot of instructions to take in a few minutes, but don't worry, we'll go over all the instructions for submitting the questions again after the presentation is done. So with that as our introductory housekeeping material, it's now my pleasure to introduce Brady McGee, who's the Wolf Recovery Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to kick us off. Brady?
All right, thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Brady McGee. I am the Mexican Wolf Recovery Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Joining me today are Amy Luters, Regional Director for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Albuquerque, Tracy Melbahes, our Mexican Wolf Policy Coordinator, Maggie Dwyer, our Deputy Mexican Wolf Recovery Coordinator, and John Oakleaf, our Mexican Wolf Field Projects Coordinator. Today, we will provide an overview of the service's proposed changes to the management regulations for Mexican wolves in the Mexican wolf experimental population area in Arizona and New Mexico under Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act. As we begin this evening, I want to let you know that our press release, frequently asked questions, the following slide deck, and additional information are available on our website at the link on your screens. With that, I would like to turn it over to Regional Director Amy Luters.
Thank you, Brady, and thanks to all of you who joined us this evening. I appreciate your investing time to hear about our proposed rule and the opportunity to ask questions. Before we get into the details of the proposed rule revisions, I did want to make sure I first acknowledge our Mexican wolf recovery partners throughout this process. We have collaborated closely with the states of Arizona and New Mexico, as well as many federal, local, and tribal partners. We invited 60 agencies to serve as cooperating agencies during this process. And on the screen, we have listed the 24 who have accepted and signed the Memorandum of Understanding to serve as cooperating agencies. During nearly a dozen meetings with these cooperating agencies, we developed and provided working drafts of the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. We solicited feedback and incorporated recommendations to the maximum extent practicable. We also met several times with the Mexican Wolf Tribal Working Group, a working group open to all tribes, and attended other tribal coordination meetings to discuss the rule revision. I want to personally thank all of these partners for their time, expertise, and support in drafting a rule that, if finalized, will bring our management actions in line with our recovery goals for the Mexican wolf. Recovering the Mexican wolf remains a top priority for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we continue to make steady progress toward this goal. The wild population of Mexican wolves in the United States saw its 5th consecutive year of growth in 2020. With a minimum of 186 Mexican wolves in the wild, the population is the largest it's ever been. We are now in the process of preparing for the 2021 count and hope to have good news to share on that front in the coming months. In a moment, Tracy is going to give you an in-depth overview of the specific changes to the 10J rule, but I want to start off with 2 key takeaways. First, the 2017 Mexican Wolf Recovery Plan will continue to serve as our roadmap to recovery. And second, the proposed 10J revision will not lessen our ability to manage for conflict on the landscape. The Fish and Wildlife Service and the Mexican Wolf Interagency Field Team will continue to work diligently to prevent, reduce, and compensate for negative impacts felt by affected stakeholders. With that, I'll turn things over to Tracy Melbahes.
All right, thank you, Amy, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. Before we jump into the rule revisions, we're going to start with just a little bit of background. We wait for the slides to come up. All right, here we go. All right, so the Mexican wolf is one of the rarest subspecies of gray wolf in North America, and they were once common throughout large portions of the southwestern United States, but they were all but eliminated from the wild by the 1970s. And then in 1976, we protected the Mexican wolf as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. So this is a timeline, and this can be found on our website. And it shows some of the key milestones for recovery as well as regulatory actions for our program. And so 2 that I'll just highlight really quickly, kind of over on the left side of the timeline there, in 1977, so when recovery efforts for the Mexican wolf really began with the effort to establish a captive population. And then jump forward to 1998, when Mexican wolves were first reintroduced back to the wild from captivity. And then at the bottom of the timeline, you can see our major regulatory actions for the Mexican wolf, including the development of the 2015 final rule to revise the designation of the Mexican wolf experimental population area. And it's that rule for which we're now proposing revisions. Okay, and now this slide provides a quick overview of our 10J rule and the process that got us here today. The main point here being 2018, when a federal judge remanded portions of the 2015 10J rule to the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we will continue working on this process with our partners until July 1st of 2022, when a final rule is due to the judge. So on this slide, you can see a map of the Mexican wolf experimental population area. And This is the Mexican wolf experimental population area, is the portion of Arizona and New Mexico that's south of Interstate 40. And within this area, we do have 3 management zones. And these are zones that establish areas for the release of Mexican wolves from captivity, as well as areas for translocation of Mexican wolves from one wild location to another wild location. And so I'll note that the geographic boundaries of the Mexican wolf experimental population area and the management zones will not be affected by the proposed revisions. Okay, now I'll shift gears to our current action, which is to revise the management regulations for the Mexican wolf experimental population area. And starting with the fact that the purpose of an experimental population under the Endangered Species Act is to contribute to the conservation and recovery of the species. And so the court's remand in 2018 required the service to ensure that several specific features of the experimental population designation provide for the long-term conservation and recovery of the Mexican wolf. This includes its population size and genetic needs, as well as ensuring that the management actions that we allow are protective of genetic diversity. And in addition, the remand also requires a fresh essentiality determination under Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act. So the proposed rule that's out right now for public comment contains the following elements that would become part of the experimental population designation. And those are the population objective, new genetic objective, temporary restriction of 3 of our existing take provisions, and again, a fresh essentiality determination. And so these proposed revisions are intended to bring the management of the experimental population into alignment with the 2017 Mexican Wolf Recovery Plan, first revision. And that recovery plan provides our long-term goals for the conservation of the Mexican wolf. And as some of you are aware, there was a recent court ruling that remanded part of the Mexican Wolf Recovery Plan back to the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we are determining our next steps in that litigation. But the primary takeaway here is that the judge did not remand any of the recovery criteria. And so that does enable us to move forward with our proposed revisions of the experimental population to align the 10J with the recovery plan, while meanwhile we respond to that court ruling. All right, first revision, that proposed revision that we will discuss is the population objective. So the population objective describes how many wolves we'll manage for in this area, and it's intended to ensure that the population is robust in size and has a very low risk of extinction. So we're proposing to manage for an average of greater than or equal to 320 wolves in the Mexican wolf experimental population area. And this will align with our recovery criteria for the United States in the revised recovery plan. And this proposed revision would remove the upper limit of 325 wolves that our regulations currently specify. Okay. Then the next revision we will discuss is the genetic objective. And the genetic objective describes how many wolves we will release from captivity into the Mexican wolf experimental population area to improve the gene diversity of the population and alleviate genetic threats. So releasing wolves from captivity improves the gene diversity of the experimental population because wolves in the captive population have genes that are not currently represented in the wild. So we're proposing to release enough wolves from captivity such that 22 survive to breeding age, which is about 2 years of age for Mexican wolves. And as with the population objective, this genetic objective aligns with our recovery criteria for the Mexican wolf in the recovery plan. Okay. The next couple of revisions that we'll talk about is in relation to our take provisions. And take provisions are essentially management actions that allow for the take of Mexican wolves. And we are proposing to restrict 3 of our existing take provisions until the genetic objective is achieved. And on one hand, these 3 take provisions provide management flexibility, but on the other hand, they could lead to the take of released wolves and hinder our progress toward the proposed genetic objective. So the take provisions that we are proposing modification to are take on federal land, take on non-federal land, and take in response to an unacceptable impact to a wild ungulate herd. So currently, our take provisions for federal land and non-federal land allow the service to issue permits to livestock operators to take a Mexican wolf in specific situations. So we're proposing to restrict the issuance of these permits based on a conditional annual process as follows. We would issue take permits on federal and non-federal land to livestock operators in the year ahead only if the service met our proposed annual benchmark for the number of released wolves surviving to breeding age in the previous year, or if we did not meet our benchmark, but permitted take in the previous year did not include released wolves. So this conditional process would allow us to continue to use this management tool as appropriate as we make progress toward recovery. And it's important to note with this that the service could use other provisions that currently exist in the rule to manage wolf livestock conflict situations in years that permits would not be offered to livestock operators. Okay, and then our take provision for take in response to an unacceptable impact to a wild ungulate herd currently allows state game and fish agencies to request removal of wolves if wolf predation is having an unacceptable impact. And we're proposing to restrict this provision completely until the genetic objective is met. And at that time, the restriction would be lifted. And then our last revision to go over is the essentiality determination. So Section 10 of the Endangered Species Act requires a determination of whether an experimental population is essential to the continued existence of a species. So we determined that the experimental population was non-essential in 1998 when we began reintroducing Mexican wolves to the wild. And now we have updated our determination as the court required. Based on the current abundance and distribution of Mexican wolves, we still find the experimental population to be non-essential. But it is important to note that non-essential does not mean unimportant. The success of the experimental population in this area is very important for the recovery of the Mexican wolf. Okay, so now I'll switch gears briefly just to touch on the documents that are out for public comment. So in addition to the proposed revised 10J rule, we also developed a draft supplemental environmental impact statement under the National Environmental Policy Act. As Amy mentioned, we worked with 24 cooperating agencies to analyze the impacts of our proposed revisions to a couple of different resource areas, including land use, human health and public safety, biological resources, economic activity, and environmental justice. And so the draft supplemental environmental impact statement has 3 alternatives. Alternative 1 is the proposed action and preferred alternative, and it includes each of the revisions I've just described: population objective, genetic objective, and the 3 proposed take revisions. And then alternative 2 is a variation of alternative 1 that does not include the temporary restriction on the take provisions. And then alternative 3 is the no action alternative, which in this case would be to maintain the existing regulations without revision from the 2015 rule. Okay, and this infographic just shows our process to revise the management regulations from the time that the 10J rule was remanded to us, which is over on the left side of the infographic, through the various steps that get us to the end, which again is to produce a final rule by July 1st of 2022. And you'll see the little red box highlighting. Does everything still sound okay? Something got a little strange there. Okay. Anyway, then you'll see the little red box saying where we are in the process now, which is that we have the documents out for public review and we are holding our public information meetings, our public hearings, and also peer review. So the reason we're here tonight, we are committed to making sure that there are robust opportunities for public participation in this process. So we published the rule in the Federal Register, as well as the draft supplemental environmental impact statement on October 29th. And we have a 90-day public comment period, which will end on January 27th of 2022. And then in addition to today's session, which again is just a question and answer session, we will hold 2 more events that will be information sessions, but then followed directly by public hearings. And those will be held on December 8th and January 11th. And in addition to participating in our online events, you can also submit written comments. There are 2 ways to submit written comments. You can do it online through regulations.gov using the docket number on the screen. And in case we do have people on the phone, I'm going to go ahead and read that really quickly. So again, the first way to submit comments online is through regulations.gov, and you'll search for docket FWS-R2-ES-2021-0103. And this information is also available on our website, and you could also just search for Mexican wolf. The second way to submit written comments is by mailing a hard copy comment to the address on the screen. And again, I will read it quickly for anybody who is on the phone. And so the address for a written comment through the mail would be Public Comments Processing in the first line, Public Comments Processing. The second line, Attention, and then again, the docket number, which is FWS-R2-ES-2021-0103. The third line is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The fourth line is MS, which stands for mail stop, MS:PRB/3W. The next line, 5275 Leesburg Pike, that's LEESBURG, Pike, PIKE. And the city and state is Falls Church, Virginia, with a zip code of 22041-3803. Okay, so public comment period will wrap up January 27th, and we will continue to work again with our cooperating agencies, tribes, and partners to publish a final rule by July 1st of 2022. So I think we are now ready for your questions.
Thanks very much, Tracy. That's a lot of good information there. And now we are interested in hearing whatever questions you all may have about any of this information. It's been said a number of times, but I think it bears repeating one more time. The reminder that tonight's session is not a formal hearing. So we're not looking for your comments just yet, other than the written comments, as Tracy mentioned. But for tonight's session, we want to know what kind of questions you have about the proposed changes you just heard about. So if you have a question and you're online, you can click the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar, which should be at the bottom of your screen. Please, again, enter only one question at a time, and we'll start to take those here. If you're on the phone and you would like to ask a question, you press 9 to raise your hand. We'll see it that way. That shows us that you have a question, and we will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. So again, if you have a question, you're on the phone, press 9. We'll just take them in as we see them. But and we call on the last 4 digits of your phone number. When we call on you, we will enable you to unmute by pressing *6. So press 9 to raise your hand. When we call on your number, you press *6, and then you'll be off mute. And once you're off mute, we ask you to state your name and ask your question. Whether you're on the phone or online, we ask that you keep the questions as brief and succinct as possible, so we can hopefully answer everyone's questions in the time we have available here tonight. So I see a few questions are starting to come in now. So I'm going to turn it over to Brady McGee to take questions and or assign them to the staff who have the expertise to answer.
Phil and Brady, just a quick point of clarification. My apologies for interrupting. That's a *9 to raise your hand.
Oh, very good. Thank you. *9.
Great, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Rick. It looks like our first question tonight is, I would like to ask why the geographic boundaries have not been adjusted. Tracy, would you like to answer that?
Sure. So when we developed the revised recovery plan for the Mexican wolf, that was our opportunity to determine a recovery strategy for the Mexican wolf. And certainly we looked at geography as well as talking about numbers and genetics and threats and all of the other relevant kind of facets of recovery. And we determined that in order to establish a robust population in the United States, and then a second robust population in Mexico, that the area in the United States where we've been working, which has been below I-40, would be sufficient to, again, establish a robust population in the United States. And so now as we're revising the 10J and wanting to align how we're managing in the wild with our recovery strategy, we're maintaining that I-40 boundary based on the recovery needs of the Mexican wolf.
Thanks, Tracy. Next question, with your quote of less than 200 wolves present now, how many ranchers have not received compensation for confirmed kills and won't that deficit only increase dramatically if the population is allowed to increase? I'm going to turn that question over to Maggie. I'm going to try to answer part of the question first and then turn over the rest to Maggie. But basically, for informational purposes, there are 2 ways in which ranchers can get paid. One is through our Fish and Wildlife Service livestock demonstration grants, which all the states and tribes that have wolves and Florida panther can compete for. This is $1 million annually that is scraped off the top of endangered species recovery money and put out there through this competitive grant process. There's also the Farm Service Agencies, which Farm Service Agency is under the USDA. Fish and Wildlife Service is under Department of Interior. But the Farm Service Agency has a livestock indemnity program for which can compensate ranchers for their livestock losses. But the next part of the question, I'll let Maggie answer.
Yeah, no, thank you, Brady, for turning that over to me. So the one of the issues with the delays, well, I guess to more directly answer your question, there are about a handful of permittees that are still awaiting compensation. Some of the delay is that most of our permittees within the experimental population area tend to apply for compensation through the wolf livestock demonstration grants rather than the livestock indemnity program that Brady mentioned is under the farm services. And a lot of that is because the LIP program through Farm Services only compensates at 75% market value, and it's based on a national average. So local permittees tend to apply for compensation through the Wolf Livestock Demonstration Grant. And a requirement of that funding is that it has a 50-50 non-federal match. So some of the delay is that there are certain times a year where we have the federal funding, but maybe are waiting on the match. Or we have the match funding, but are waiting on the federal grant to come through. So some of the delay is just that repeat in the cycle. And we've actually gotten pretty good in the last, maybe, I'm going to say 6 months in catching up on that, to whereas there's only about a handful of people that are waiting compensation currently.
Thanks, Maggie. Next question. What are the most substantive changes in the preferred alternative? And how do those changes move the Mexican wolf toward recovery? Tracy, would you like to take that one?
Sure, thanks, Brady. So the preferred alternative is alternative 1. And so that includes all of the proposed changes that we talked about tonight so far. So I'll list them again, and then I'll kind of go through them and how they move the Mexican wolf toward recovery. So again, that was the population objective, a new genetic objective, and the proposed restriction of 3 take provisions. And so how they move the Mexican wolf toward recovery, the first one, the population objective, again, is aimed at making sure that the number of wolves that are out in the wild is robust. And that just means that the population itself is stable over time. And so that's obviously important for recovery because we want the population to have a low risk of extinction. And so based on kind of the data crunching that we've done, we expect that a population average of greater than or equal to 320 wolves will give that population about a 90% chance of persistence over 100 years. And so again, a good stable population that has a very high likelihood of continuing to survive. And then the second change, the genetic objective, this is again where we're trying to make sure that the population is robust genetically. So we want to make sure that things like inbreeding aren't happening, and that the population is able to just change over time as conditions on the landscape change. And so having better gene diversity than we currently have, again, will help to alleviate those genetic threats. And so here again, based on a lot of data crunching that we've done, we think that if we can represent about 90% of the genes that are in captivity in the wild, that we will have given, again, the wild population very good footing for being able to be genetically robust over time. And then again, those take provisions with restricting 3 of them for a temporary amount of time. Again, we're doing that, we're proposing to do that in support of being able to achieve the recovery objectives and move recovery forward. Excuse me. So each of the proposed changes is very strategically directed toward moving the Mexican wolf toward recovery.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah.
Next question. It is extremely difficult to get drawn for an elk permit in Arizona, as it is. Won't the change make getting drawn to legally hunt in Arizona be virtually impossible due to wolves taking even more of the ungulate population? So this is a couple of things I want maybe Tracy to answer the first part of what the actual change is. And then Tracy can pass on some of the elk population information, data, et cetera, to John in regards to impacts that are, we see up in the Northern Rockies or even here in the Southwest. So Tracy, you want to explain what the actual change we're making is?
Yeah, so I'll go over the change, and then I'll also just kind of hit on some of the rationale behind it, which might help answer this question as well. And so again, the proposed revision is to restrict the take provision for take in response to an unacceptable impact to wild ungulate herd. And again, meaning that the states would not come forward with a request to Fish and Wildlife Service to remove wolves in an area if they were having a pretty significant predation impact on a wild ungulate herd. And so the thinking here is that right now, based on data that's been collected, we haven't seen any kind of significant impact to wild ungulates in the Mexican wolf experimental population area. Now we have, around minimum population last year was 186 wolves. Obviously it's going to continue to grow. So we would potentially expect for those impacts to become more likely as the wolf population gets bigger. And so in restricting the take provision now during a period when the wolf population is not having impacts, the idea is that we really don't need to use this take provision very much right now. But again, later in time, we may need to a little bit more. So I think there are about estimates from the states, maybe 90,000 elk between the two states in the I-40 area. And John, I think I'm trying to look at the question here, but I think I'm going to hand it over to you for a second in case you're having thoughts on this.
No, I think you covered it very well. Thanks for handing it over, Tracy. Good evening, everybody. The states have not seen a measurable impact on the elk populations to date. And so the idea that this number and density of wolves have not caused a measurable impact to elk, and therefore have not impacted the number of permits. And so our prediction is that that will go into the future. And so the take provisions shouldn't impact your permits out there. I will note that I lived in Arizona for 8 years as well and never drew an elk tag myself. So I sympathize with this comment.
Thanks, Tracy and John. Next question. If you have already developed the alternatives without public comment, how much weight will the public comments have in the final draft or in the final rule and EIS? Tracy?
Sure. So we went out for public scoping on this topic, the fact that we were going to be revising the rule in response to the court-ordered remand. And so we put a scoping notice out in April of 2022 for, I believe, 60 days to take public comment. And we got a lot of public comment. We got over 87,000 comments, actually, with members of the public providing information and opinions on the various parts of the rule that we were looking to revise. And in that scoping notice, we did explain kind of what the court-ordered remand had been about, and so specifically what parts of the rule we were looking at revising to try to help direct public comment and input, you know, really on those areas that we were going to be looking at. So I can say without question that the comments that came in had an impact on how we developed what we developed. In fact, I see a name of somebody on here tonight that I specifically remember their comment, and it led to the concept of making sure that management flexibility follows our documented progress toward recovery. And so it kind of led us toward that benchmark scenario that we have proposed. So public input is incredibly important. And so now, during this public comment period, again, 90 days, when it closes, we will go through all of the public comments and read them and synthesize them. And that's a lengthy process where we look at all of the topics that people talk about in the comments. We kind of look at everything related to a topic together and see what information and data or opinions can kind of continue to guide us. So public comment absolutely matters. And so information right now on in the proposed rule, we kind of state some of the things that we really would like public comment on specifically, such as the extent to which the population objective will help get us toward recovery, any impacts that the restriction of take measures might have on landowners or other members of the public. So I would just say, please definitely look at the rule, because we do provide really specific guidance there on how to provide comments that we will spend time reading and thinking about.
Thanks, Tracy. Next question, what measurable standards for genetic health in the US, or I'm sorry, what measurable standards for genetic health is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service planning to use to ensure that the wild population is not simply growing in numbers, but also improving its resilience and ability to adapt to a changing environment? Tracy, would you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah, so I think it's twofold. One is that, again, we have proposed to have the genetic objective, again, with the idea that we know we need to improve the gene diversity in the wild by getting more of the gene diversity from captivity into the wild. And so that's part of it. But then in addition, obviously, depending on which 22 wolves survive to breeding age, that can change the genetics, which wolves are released, which ones survive. And so over time, we are also going to be measuring the genetic, I'll just say health. That's probably a term that geneticists might cringe at a little bit, but it's just conceptually useful. So measures of genetic health that help us understand how the population is doing. So for example, the measure of mean kinship, which is a measure of how related wolves are to each other. And obviously, because this was a population that started out small and came from a limited number of founders, the wolves in the wild have been kind of highly related to one another, and we're trying to break that up and reduce mean kinship. We're trying to reduce inbreeding potential. We're trying to increase gene diversity. So we do have specific measures that we track with the captive population as well. So we measure these things in captivity, and we will measure them in the wild to make sure that resilience is going to improve over time, and adaptability to a changing environment, and all of those things.
All right, thanks, Tracy. Next question. Do future restoration efforts include reintroduction or dispersal of wolves to the Sky Island Mountains in southern Arizona? And I will attempt to answer this question. Right now, our population, or less, in the last few years, our population has been growing pretty significantly. We've experienced anywhere from 14 to 25% growth rate over the last 3 or 4 years. And so we're not planning on reintroducing wolves into any more areas. We're planning on managing the population as it is and as it grows. What we are doing is cross fostering from captivity, where we take pups that are less than 10 days old and mix those with pups in the wild in order to boost the genetics of the wild population. But in regards to actual reintroduction areas, we don't plan on expanding that out. Wolves primarily eat elk, and so we expect the population to grow and expand where the elk populations are. We have had several wolves disperse in the Sky Islands areas, but they haven't stayed there. And I think one of the reasons being is that there aren't many elk in the Sky Island areas. So I think in the future, as the population grows and expands and wolves disperse more in a broader area, we'll probably have more expand down into the Sky Islands. But at this time, it's not something we see very often, and we don't have any efforts or plans to actually reintroduce wolves down in that area. Next question is, under the preferred alternative, can the U.S. wild population be delisted before the Mexican population reaches its numerical and genetic objectives? Tracy, would you like to take a shot at that?
Sure. So I guess a little bit of a clarification first, which is that the preferred alternatives look at, or the alternatives, all 3 of the alternatives in the environmental impact statement look at the impacts of the proposed revisions or not doing the proposed revisions. And so the EIS is very specific to that analysis. So delisting is a separate process that's outside of the EIS, it's outside of the 10J. So in general, then the question is just saying, well, what happens if we here in the US get our population up to the population objective, genetic objective, which are also the recovery criteria? Can we move forward and delist? And so the answer to that would be no, that recovery of the Mexican wolf needs to be range wide, which means that Mexico does need to achieve its criteria as well, so that we can make sure that threats to the Mexican wolf have been alleviated throughout its range. And so there again, we did think about that a little bit as we proposed these revisions, with the idea that because our program is a bit ahead of Mexico's, we began reintroducing wolves in 1998. Mexico began in 2010, 2011. And so it is possible that we will reach our objectives before Mexico will, and be in a little bit of a holding pattern. So.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Next question is the issue of whether to provide wolf GPS location data to private entities part of this rulemaking process. I can start off answering this, but then I'm going to turn it over to John to fill in additional information. John, being the field projects coordinator, it is not part of this rulemaking process, and we do provide through various means the locations of wolves. In fact, we have on our website a general location of map that people can go to, the general public can go to, ranchers can go to and look at and get a general location of the wolf. But I'm going to turn it over to John to provide a little bit more background information and what we do in the field with location information, because there's a lot of sensitivity around it and a lot of needs to not share some of the information, because we do experience a lot of mortalities, human caused mortalities in the field. So, but I'll let John follow up. So John.
Thank you, Brady. I'm going to try to share my screen here just so that people can see our website. Will you guys, is it on now?
Yes.
Yep. So where this is available at is on our website. So you can Google it, FWS Mexican wolves, and you can pull up the recent wolf locations, and it will show you these hexagons. Whoops. These hexagons of locations that you can zoom in on and what the wolves are a bit. Now, these are generalized locations. They're updated every 2 weeks. So they're not specific GPS points, but they are the wolves located somewhere within that hexagon. And so that's our general information that we provide to the public, available to anybody. We do get more specific with some ranchers when particular problems are going on, and we'll communicate with those folks more intensively as depredations are ongoing on their property, or in the case of trying to move cattle away from den sites or where wolves are, and trying to prevent depredations as a whole and working together. So that's how we use the locations. That's how we provide the locations, and hopefully that helps people. And I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next question is, if the service reaches its population objective and delists the U.S. population, how can it ensure that Arizona and New Mexico and tribes do not let the numbers fall below that level? And I'll take first stab at this and then maybe turn it over to Tracy. But within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, when we delist an animal, we write a post-delisting monitoring plan that sets into place different objectives and levels of measure. If a population falls too low, then we will relist it. But once we delist an animal, we turn over the management authority to the states, and the states will be writing a management plan and providing, as probably part of the delisting, objectives within that plan that should be a viable and self-sustaining population, and managing towards that. So Tracy, do you want to follow up with anything on that?
No, Brady, I think that's great.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. Next question is, going back to geographic boundaries, has the service considered expanding the boundary to include forested areas north of Flagstaff that is considered suitable Mexican wolf habitat, and to use Mexican wolves to manage the bison population on the north rim of the Grand Canyon? And I will take first stab at this, but I'm also going to pass it off. Right now, Tracy mentioned a little bit before about focusing the geographic boundary south of I-40. Part of that is lining up making sure this 10J lines up with the recovery plan. The recovery plan is the roadmap for what it will take to get an endangered species off the federal list. And so the 10J is actually a tool that is used as part of that recovery plan and roadmap to get there. And so with this 10J revision and the focus that we were told to look at by the court, it doesn't really consider expanding the boundary to the north of there. But I know in the past when with the recovery plan and some previous earlier drafts, that there were some habitat. The Fish and Wildlife Service has looked at habitat throughout the range. And so that's why I'm going to turn part of this answer over to Tracy, because Tracy was the main lead for writing that recovery plan. But John was also instrumental in some of that habitat analysis. But Tracy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I guess I would just briefly say that yeah, certainly the Fish and Wildlife Service over the years has looked at a lot of information to determine the path forward for gray wolf recovery and Mexican wolf recovery, and kind of how those two go together or not. And so, yeah, there have been times during the history of Mexican wolf conservation efforts when we've just looked more broadly at the southwestern United States. I mean, even going back to a number of years ago, for anybody who remembers the distinct population segments that were listed back in the early 2000s, where the kind of lines were drawn differently on the maps for how to conserve wolves in different areas. And so, yes, there is certainly habitat that could be considered gray wolf habitat, broadly speaking, north of I-40 and on. John or Maggie, anything more on that?
I don't have anything to add. It's more of a question of the subspecies boundaries and where we're putting our 10J boundary than specifically the habitat as generic gray wolf habitat.
So as part of that, the answer that all three of us just gave, it doesn't really include the bison population or the North Rim or the Grand Canyon for those reasons. So the next question is, what other wild animal brought back from the brink of extinction has boundaries like what is imposed on the Mexican wolf? Brady? I don't know, maybe that's for all three of us or four of us to answer and think about. I know there are a number of species that are reintroduced under the 10J of the Endangered Species Act. One that pops to mind, like black-footed ferret, is one. And so the purposes of the 10J and reintroducing specifically like the Mexican wolf is to reduce Section 9 take prohibitions of the Act so that we can more effectively manage the population in a way that leads to recovery faster, quicker, and easier, and more efficiently. And so when we designate a 10J under the Act says we have to draw a line on the map. We have to draw, and it's not really it's a boundary issue of wolves that are within the 10J are considered non-essential experimental population, and the regulations are reduced. But if the wolf moves north of, or for instance, with the Mexican wolf, I-40 is the northern boundary, and wolves that move north of I-40 and disperse north of I-40, the full protections of the Act apply. So all the take prohibitions associated with the Endangered Species Act are in place. And it, in cases like with wolves that eat livestock, it makes management a lot harder in those instances when the full protections of the Act are in place. And so that's why there's a boundary there, because the act says you have to draw a line on the map and say, this is where it is. We've tried to line up that boundary with the historic range of the subspecies as best as we had at the time on the scientific information, but it's not really a hard or imposed boundary. But with Mexican wolves, those that are north of I-40 can't be managed in the same way as those south of I-40. So anything to add to that, Tracy, John, or Maggie? They're all shaking their head no. So
I would just maybe really quickly to kind of summarize what you said is I think there might not be another animal that has the same fact pattern as the Mexican wolf. I mean, it is a pretty unique story, right? It did go down to the brink of extinction. We have a captive population. It's a wide-ranging predator. There are a lot of, interesting and unique things about the Mexican wolf that has made the conservation effort challenging and complex in its own way. And so there really might not be anything that's similar.
yeah, thanks, Tracy. Next question is, if I would like to see something added to the new proposal that is not included, is the public hearing comment submission a way to ask for that, or is nothing going to be added? Tracy, would you like to address that?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So ideas can come in a couple of different ways. One would be to, as you're saying, attend one of the next sessions on December 8th or January 11th during the public hearing and give formal oral testimony. You could also submit a written comment through those two ways that we talked about earlier, the regulations.gov or a hard copy mailed to the Falls Church address. So any of those would be fantastic. So yes, definitely. We love good ideas.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Next question is, if you aren't seeing much or measurable wild ungulate populations, then what are the wolves eating? Cattle? And I'll take first stab and turn over the rest of the answer to John. One of the reasons we aren't seeing impacts to wild ungulates is that there's approximately 90,000 elk south of I-40 within this area. We're trying to recover the wolf. The wolf's primary prey is elk. But we have around 186 wolves, and when you have 186 wolves, they usually a group of 5 wolves will eat one elk every 7 to 14 days or so, maybe 10 days. And so with 186 wolves and 90,000 elk, there's just not that many, that big of an impact. Most of the time too with wolves are not good killers. They're not efficient killers. They're different than like mountain lions. Mountain lions are solitary animals. They have retractable claws. They can reach around and grab and hold on. And they don't, so because of that, wolves have to travel in packs, whereas mountain lions are solitary single animals. And so because wolves aren't very good killers, they need to travel in packs to help bring down larger prey like elk. And usually when they do, they take out the sicker and the weaker, because those are the ones that are easier to kill. And so what we've seen in the Northern Rocky Mountains is that the impacts are pretty minimal. It might shift some elk herds around to different areas, but the elk herds are pretty resilient, and in most places they're either stable or growing. Even in the Northern Rockies, where you have state like Montana or something where there's 1,500 wolves up in those states. So when it comes to 186 wolves down here in the Southwest and 90,000 elk, the impacts are very, very minimal. But John, I'll turn it over to John and let him follow up with additional information.
No, I think that's fair. A lot of the research has shown that when you have wolves and grizzly bears and humans and lions, when you have a full suite of predators on elk population, you can have some decline in that population. Down in the Southwest, obviously, we don't have grizzly bears compared to the Northern Rockies. So that's one thing, one less predator. There are black bears in both areas. And so there is some differences in the Northern Rockies as well. There's heavy winter die-off that doesn't occur as much in the Southwest. And so there's a whole host of reasons why you don't see impacts yet, including the numbers are small. And whether those impacts actually happen in the future or not is still an open question. All we can say is to date, we haven't seen a measurable impact. And so, and that's from our state partners. Obviously, we're not the experts on the ungulates. That's from our state partners. So thanks, Brady.
And John, do you want to mention the study that the Arizona and New Mexico state game and fish agencies, they're investing quite a bit of money. They've caught radio collared, over 400 elk throughout Arizona, New Mexico, looking at impacts of not just wolves, but all predators. And they're about 2 or 3 years into a 5-year study, and maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, they have, the study is ongoing, so they do have some preliminary results, but certainly wolves do predate upon elk. There's no question that that's the case. The lions are higher than wolves, and I think black bears were higher than wolves in terms of numbers, absolute numbers in those preliminary data. But they are investing money. They are looking at elk populations. They're looking at what their rates are now, and so that they can better detect any impacts in the future as well. And so the data to date is coarse. It's elk population numbers. It's hard to see a finer impact. And so they're looking to get better data on those impacts and to see if what the wolves are doing. But as Brady mentioned, wolves tend to be more compensatory mortality, i.e. the animals would die from other things out on the landscape versus additive mortality. And that's where lions come in, because they would kill more prime age animals, and wolves tend to kill younger and older animals. So the population continues to reproduce and grow despite those mortalities. And it's all relative. It's not saying that the wolves can't kill a prime age animal, because sometimes they do. But relatively, wolves tend to select more older aged and younger aged animals, which would die anyways. And also compared to hunters and mountain lions, and so those type of animals. So that may explain why some of the impacts aren't being seen so far.
Thanks, John. Next question is, with wolves being reintroduced into Colorado, how will that impact how the service manages dispersing wolves between the Southwest and the Rocky Mountain populations? Maggie, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Brady. So I think the Fish and Wildlife Service has been really clear on how we intend to manage Mexican wolves, right? We're focusing south of Interstate 40. We've long kind of asked ourselves the question of what would we do if a northern gray wolf came down into our population. We haven't had to really answer that question yet, but we've been thinking about it for a long time. And obviously with the idea that northern gray wolves may be reintroduced into Colorado, that exacerbates the speed at which we might need to answer that question. We don't have an answer to the question if a gray wolf came into the Mexican wolf experimental population area, what we would do. We do have a plan to kind of develop a sort of a genetics advisory team to help us look at what maybe some of the management actions we might need to take, whether that integration would be welcomed at some point, whether it's now or in the future, or maybe not at all. The Endangered Species Act does have, it protects species at the species, subspecies, and DPS level. And so if gray wolves are delisted and Mexican wolves stay listed, we have all sorts of policy issues that we even need to figure out then. So I think the short answer to your question is, this is something we think about, and we don't quite have an answer yet, but obviously with Colorado considering gray wolf reintroduction, it does become something we have to more quickly look into.
Thanks, Maggie. Next question. If the 22 released wolves mentioned in the genetic objective do not actually reproduce in the wild, can this be considered a true contribution to mitigating inbreeding, increasing gene diversity in the wild population? Tracy?
Sure. Well, so yeah, as we've kind of hit on a little bit, obviously, in order for gene diversity in the wild to improve, the released wolves will, some portion of those will breed, and then those offspring will run off, and some portion of those will survive and some portion of those will breed, right? And then the impacts to the population begin to be observable over time. And so that is going to take a little while, but certainly the intention is for some of those 22 released wolves to breed. And so obviously when we're dealing with something like trying to set objectives and criteria, there is some bit of kind of forecasting and predicting that has to happen, but it's based on a whole lot of very high quality data where we can estimate that some of those 22 wolves that have survived to breeding age will breed. So yeah, if no released wolf ever survived or bred, then no, we would not have changed the genetics. But that's also why over time we will be looking at other types of genetic markers in the population to continue to verify in other ways that we're seeing the types of shifts that we need to see. And probably our methodology for how we'll do that over time will change as the population continues to grow.
Thanks, Tracy. Next question, are there any revisions in the plan to how Fish and Game will handle a wolf that didn't obey the boundaries? I will take a shot at answering that one. The revisions that we're making now, we're focusing on the specific things that the court asked us to do, and this was not one of them. But also when we write 10J and have to designate the boundaries under the act, the provisions and everything that we write into that 10J only apply within the boundaries that are set forth in that 10J. So anything outside of that are not part of the actual 10J itself. And so, so for instance, wolves that move north of I-40 because that's the northern boundary, we can't write anything into a 10J or a 10J revision that are outside of that 10J boundary. So we don't have anything in there for this. Next question is, there are lots of elk in the Flagstaff area. Why not let them be above I-40? And so I think some of the question has been answered a little bit before with the focus of the reintroduction efforts, with the focus of creating a population south of I-40 based upon the recovery plan and lining up our 10J with the recovery plan. And so I don't know, anything more to Tracy, you or John want to add to that?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, thanks. Next question is, does the presence of Mexican wolves actually benefit the health of elk herds? I will take first stab and then turn over to John, because John's got a great scientific background and knows a lot of the information. But I truly believe that wolves do increase the health of elk herds because they do take out the sick and the weak individuals. And so for those reasons, yes. But John?
No, Dr. McGee, you handled it very well. I think that's
Thanks,
correct.
John. Next question is, so Idaho's objective is to kill 90% of their wolf population. Who says Arizona wouldn't do that? Tracy, do you want to take that?
Sure. So Idaho's recent management regulations have been put into place since the gray wolf has been delisted up in the Northern Rockies area. And so obviously that's a very different position than where we are right now. But if you're kind of flashing forward to the future of if we delisted the Mexican wolf and then Mexican wolves it would be the purview of the state game and fish agencies and the tribes to maintain the Mexican wolf at recovered levels. And so basically it behooves the state to maintain an animal at recovered levels, because otherwise there are provisions to do emergency listings or to relist a species with federal protections if it's needed. So, we worked really closely with the states when we developed the recovery plan to make sure that we had regulations in place at the time of delisting that would keep Mexican wolves at a healthy recovered level. So it's to the extent it's built into our process to work with the states to make sure that regulations are set up at the time of delisting and to conduct post-delisting monitoring. And then again, there are other provisions that are available if need be.
Thanks, Tracy. Next question is, could you please elaborate on the other types of genetic markers that might be used in the future? I'm curious how much will be directly measured versus measured indirectly or by proxy. And I think I'm going to let Maggie take first stab at answering this.
Okay, yeah, sure. So currently, a lot of our genetic monitoring of the wild population is done when we handle an animal, we collect blood samples, and we handle a lot of our animals. More than 50% of our population in the past has been radio collared. And so when we catch an animal to put on a radio collar, we are obtaining those genetic samples and sending them in to the lab for analysis. In addition to that, through cross fostering, we're handling dozens and dozens of den-bound pups every year. So right now we're getting a lot of genetic data coming in on all of our animals, or not all of the animals, but a really significant portion of the population. When you look at how other wild populations are genetically monitored, they don't have this much kind of hands-on, specifically blood sampling of the animals. Obviously through time, we'll probably be radio collaring and handling, as the population grows, we'll be handling less percentage of the population. And we've been talking to some of our genetic partners, so to speak, about different ways of sampling the population. A really good way they do it up in Idaho is they collect scat from den and rendezvous sites. That way you're getting the breeding adults and the pups from that year, and you can monitor those pups as they grow up through the population. So we're not really worried. Right now we have a great handle on the wild pedigree, and I don't see us having a big slippery slope into having, an issue there. And I think there are lots of ways to continue monitoring the population going forward. I think we will have to adjust to kind of us having an addiction to information. Right now we have a lot of information coming in on the population, and we will be having less information coming in going forward, but that doesn't mean we won't be having enough.
Thanks, Maggie. This may be the last question in the Quayway, but I'm not sure. As it is now, the collars are turned off at night. Wouldn't ranchers be better able to protect their cattle and decrease conflicts if they were able to see where the wolves are at night when they primarily hunt? John, would you like to field this one?
Sure, happy to. One of the things we have the ability, the reason why the collars are turned off at night, first of all, is because we want to have the collars last as long as possible. So we try to shoot for 3 years on the collars. And so in order to save battery life, we have to turn off the VHF at night. We can turn on the VHF at night so the ranchers can monitor them and try to prevent depredations along with us. So we do that as one of our management actions if something's happening with particular wolves. So we will turn them on. We will try to haze the wolves at night. When they're hunting, we will work with ranchers to use all those tools. It's not always on, and so it takes us turning them on via the satellites in order to save battery life. So it's an excellent, thank you for the question.
So that is all of the questions we have in the queue right now. Please, we have plenty of time. If you have additional questions or follow-ups on anything that's been said already, please do submit those. Those of you on the phone, if you have questions, remember it's *9 to raise your hand. We'll see you and call on you, which will allow you to unmute your line and ask your question. Looks like we have a couple more coming. Give us just a moment to bring them in.
Well, I see a question here. It looks like, are there any new technologies for the ranchers to use on the horizon? John?
The answer is we're trying new things. We do try, I don't know if I can even do this, if you can see this, but well, this isn't really working out for me, but there's a motion activated ear tag light that we're trying on some cows, testing out there. That's a ear tag thing. And so part of the difficulty in the Mexican wolf area is cattle are spread over a wide area. And so even calving, and so there's year-round activity. And so one of the unique challenges about this area is trying to find something that protects those individual groups or small groups over a broad landscape. And so those are some of the challenges that I've been thinking about personally and trying to get to the individual protection level. And so there's some ideas that people are working on. None of them are proven yet. In smaller areas, there is turbo fladry, which works pretty effectively, which is electric fence with flagging on it. Wolves are afraid of the new things. And so and when they test it, they tend to bite at it. And so the fencing shocks them. So there's a wide variety of tools that we work with ranchers on and try. And we haven't found a silver bullet and probably aren't going to find a silver bullet that prevents all depredations. But if it helps, we're willing to try, and we're working with folks to try out these new technologies.
Thanks, John. We have another question in here. It looks like it relates to the essentiality determination. And given the space and other resource limits in the SSP, is it really realistic to expect that the SSP could replace the wild population if anything catastrophic were to occur? And I may let Maggie field the first part of that question, or field that question entirely, since Maggie oversees the captive site population in SSP. So Maggie?
Yeah, I think I'll let Tracy address the kind of the terminology with essentiality, because I do think that people tend to focus on what our kind of Webster definition of that word means versus what the definition of it is under the Endangered Species Act. But the answers about the SSP and the space limitations, we did model the SSP's ability to provide wolves to both the United States population and Mexico's population as described in the recovery plan, like the needs of the recovery plan and the releases of wolves such that 22 survived to breeding age. We did model the SSP's ability to do that, and it can do it successfully. I think another thing to consider is that the SSP is overcrowded right now. So actually releasing wolves from the SSP does help, all three populations, three being the US, Mexico, and the wild. And another thing to consider is that when we started reintroducing Mexican wolves into the United States in 1998, there were far fewer wolves in the SSP than there are currently. So there aren't any concerns at this point as to whether or not the SSP can support the reintroduction efforts as we've laid out in the recovery plan. But Tracy, do you want to talk about the essentiality determination or add anything there?
No, I think I'll hold off because I see the next question is kind of more on it, and I think I can tie in some of what you're thinking about maybe to the next question.
Okay, next question is, wouldn't it be prudent to consider an essential designation now rather than waiting for that potential catastrophe? It seems like it would be extremely difficult for the SSP to replace the wild population, especially given the generations of wild experience that would be lost if anything happened to the wild packs. Not to mention cross-fostering being dependent on established, experienced, well-bonded packs being available. So Tracy, do you want to take that?
Yeah, and I think there's probably a couple different parts to the answer to this question. But one thing to think about, and it kind of ties back to a question that somebody asked earlier this evening about whether there were any other situations that were like the Mexican wolf. And I would say that this is kind of one of those unique aspects of our program where, the way that the law was written, it talks about basically, whether or not the species, the experimental population is essential to the continued existence of the species in the wild. And so obviously that question is typically asked when you start a reintroduction program with the designation of a 10J population. And so this is one of those kind of strange times and interesting fact patterns where we're having to kind of go back and answer it, 20 plus years into our reintroduction effort. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, we think that the likelihood of something catastrophic happening is extremely low because obviously we have had experience with reintroducing wolves in this area, and we have seen, especially in the last 5 years or so, the population really start to take off and to grow, and we expect that to continue. Our average growth over the last 5 years under the 2014 rule or 2015 rule has been about 14%. So I think the likelihood of some sort of catastrophe happening in reality is extremely low, but we do have to kind of ask ourselves that question simply because of the way that the law is written. And then I think, as Maggie said, certainly we would need to work closely with the SSP. And for those who may not understand kind of the way the captive population is set up as well, we do refer to it as a single population, but really this is about 50 facilities that hold wolves spread out in the United States and Mexico, and we manage them as one population by moving wolves between facilities when we need to for breeding events. And so certainly, as Maggie said, we would have to work with all of those facilities if we did have to start a reintroduction from scratch. And obviously we wouldn't be starting with cross-fostering because, as the commenter notes, that requires putting little puppies in a den with some adults that can raise them, and we wouldn't be able to do that. We would have to start with full-grown adults and pairs and packs and have a different strategy at the beginning of a reintroduction effort than the strategy that we're using right now.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. Anything you'd like to add to that, Maggie? Okay, just shaking your head, no. So next question is, how many wolves have been killed or dispersed during the time periods that ranchers had access to GPS collar locations? So I'm going to turn that one over to John.
So I think the idea here is that ranchers since 2002, which is the limit of my time period in the field, have access to either VHF locations on wolves or GPS locations at some times that we relate to them. And the mortality rate has remained relatively flat during that time. And by the mortality rate, it's more of how many collared animals die relative to survive during the time period. And so we don't have specific information where there's some nefarious activity that's going on as a result of ranchers per se as a group. And so sharing the information, on the other hand, provides the opportunity for us to prevent cattle depredations, which results in a large number of wolves removed in through time. And so that's the balance that we go back and forth on. If law enforcement was to notify us that they had concerns with a particular rancher or a particular area, at that time, we would quit sharing those locations or get our receiver back. And so we depend on our law enforcement for those kind of information. And I can think of one area where we did that, but just one area since 2002.
Thanks, John. Next question. Are you claiming the recovery plan modeled replacing all or most of a 320 population? If so, how long would it take to replace that many in the wild? I'll let Tracy answer that, but Tracy may want to hand that over to Maggie on some of the answers. So Tracy?
Yeah, sure. I think since Maggie was kind of in the flow of that, I will just pass it to her.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to raise my hand before you handed it off, Brady. Yeah, so after I made that comment, I went back and read what the question actually was, and I saw the catastrophe thing more directly. So what I was speaking to is in the recovery plan or that process, we modeled whether or not the captive population could provide wolves to the wild populations in the United States and Mexico at the rate we were asking releases to occur. So it was not, if wolf populations were drawn down to zero, could the captive population support reestablishment of the wild populations in the US and Mexico? So thank you for pointing that out. I do think though, we have not modeled that, right? I do think though, we have learned a ton in the several decades that we've been reestablishing and releasing wolves in the US and Mexico. It took us a lot of learning to get a population kind of going and on the ground. So I think we all have that memory in mind of the early days of reintroducing captive wolves to the wild. I do think that it would be kind of bigger, better, faster, stronger if the population was drawn to zero and we were able to kind of start over with the captive population, bigger, better, faster, stronger than, you know, kind of the 1998 through 2005 era. Not to say that it can or can't occur just because I think it would be bigger, better, faster, stronger, but I do think that we have to capitalize on the things that we've learned. And we know we have a stronger ability to get those animals established on the landscape. What I think would be the primary concern is if your population of near 200 wolves-ish at this point goes down to zero, whether or not it's a good idea to establish that population again on the landscape until you've addressed what the issue is for why that happened. So the issue may be bigger than whether or not the captive population can support that reestablishment again.
Thank you, Maggie. We have another question here. I think the next question applies more to the recovery plan than actually to the 10J revision. The question is, does the service have any plans to address illegal take with the upcoming revisions based on the recent October 14th court ruling? And I think that's the court ruling on the recovery plan. And those, so what we are planning to do, the judge specifically said we needed to address human caused mortality within our recovery actions. And so we do plan on updating that recovery plan to address human caused mortality. But it is separate from this 10J revision and not part of this 10J revision. So we have another question that says, if you're planning on how to reconstitute a wild population that suffers catastrophic losses, why aren't you actually testing the system by releasing a few well-bonded pairs with pups? Are you afraid that SSPs can't do it in a timely fashion with enough releasable families? And I could take first stab at maybe answering that and then follow up by somebody else. But we have, since the inception of this program in 1998, a history of reintroducing wolves from captivity into the wild, including adult pairs with pups. And we know how the process works and are pretty familiar with the process across the board. Right now, our focus is on cross fosters because the wild parents can raise those pups to be wild. When you take an adult from captivity that's been raised in captivity, that's used to people, and put them out in the wild, those adults are not as scared of people and have tended to result in more complications where they wind up on people's porches eating, the dog food that people leave out for their dogs. So there's a whole myriad of issues that arise from releasing adults from captivity into the wild. Not sure I'm addressing the entire question, so I may turn over some other parts to John first on the wild part, on the field part of the well bonded pairs. So John.
We've done some analysis on the well bonded pairs, and we've obviously pairs with pups that are released into the wild are pretty effective at establishing in the wild. And so those are the research is pretty clear, and we've done enough experimentation where we understand how to reestablish that if we need to. The cross fosters animals have been close to as successful, and they cause less controversy. And it's not that captive animals are unable to be released into the wild in certain situations and be successful, because obviously we established our population through captive animals. It's just that they're more prone than a wild animal to some behaviors, nuisance behaviors, and those types of things that you have to actively manage for. So it's a lot of hard work, and cross fosters have proven to be almost as effective and a less work intensive method of introducing the genetics to the wild.
Thank you, John. Are there any more questions in the system? I'm not seeing any.
We still have plenty of time. Again, if you're on the phone, *9 to raise your hand. Or any follow-ups?
Looks like we have a new question that's come in. Can anyone speak to why the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is aligning the recovery plan and 10J rule? So maybe let Tracy answer that one.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so in general, it makes sense for an experimental population designation to line up with the overall recovery goals for a species, because the purpose of a 10J is to contribute to the conservation and recovery of the species. Specifically, kind of in our case, the judge in the 2018 remand of our 2015 10J rule specifically called out a couple of areas where she did not think that the 2015 rule served the long-term conservation and recovery of the Mexican wolf. She said that it was geared more towards short-term conservation. And so it just so happens that after we had finished the 2015 10J rule, we then got back into the process of trying to revise the recovery plan. The first recovery plan was written back in 1982, and the agency had tried to update it a couple of times and had not gotten it all the way across the finish line. And so when we jumped in again, starting in 2015, 2016, then we did finalize a recovery plan in 2017. And so that gave us, our overall strategy and vision for what Mexican wolf recovery looked like. And so then with the remand coming on top of that, it really, again, has allowed us now to look at very strategic, targeted ways that we can revise the experimental population designation so that it aligns with our newly crafted vision of recovery. So both because the purpose under the Endangered Species Act as well, it's because of what the judge called out in the rule.
Thank you, Tracy. Have another question that came in. It is, when will we see the 2019 and 2020 annual reports? I can say that the 2019 annual report will likely be completed and posted the week after Thanksgiving. So just a couple of more weeks, we will get that out. One of the issues that we've been facing the last few years is that these annual reports actually take a lot of time and effort and work from not only the Fish and Wildlife Service field team, but also Arizona, New Mexico, our other field agencies field team as well. And in the past, these were typically done around the March timeframe or so a year, where we had about, or March to April, May timeframe, where we had a little bit of time that the field team could focus working on these annual reports. The rest of the year is blocked out and filled with all kinds of activities. And as the wolf population has grown and expanded so much in the last 3 years, in addition to us increasing our cross-fostering efforts during the same time frame of April, May, when we were focusing on these annual reports, we have not been able to keep up with the annual reports like we have in the past. Our cross-foster efforts are very labor intensive. They're usually 24 to 48 hour operations once they begin, but they begin, several days ahead of time, from den searches to all sorts of things. So it takes a great deal of effort, time, coordination that we just haven't been able to focus on our annual reports. So right now we are looking at revamping our database so that we can do information dumps that are more efficient and help us get these annual reports out more quickly, rather than having people sit down on a computer and actually writing it when they don't have time to do that. And so the 2019 annual report is coming out in just a couple of weeks. Will be posted on our website. We're looking at revamping how the 2020 and even 2021 annual reports are going to look, but that also takes some script writing so that we can do a data dump out of our database in order to do that. And that's going to take some effort and some time, but we're looking at trying to get the 2020 annual report out around the March timeframe, sometime after our annual helicopter capture counts, or January, February. Try to get that done in March, and then come April, we're doing cross fosters again. So right now we're shooting for end of March for the 2020 annual reports. Anything further to add on that, John?
No, just that with the automation of it, it's possible that we'll have both the 2020 and 2021 annual reports out at the same time there. So
Thank you, John. We have another question that says, since the wolf release areas expanded, where have you released wolves in the expansion areas, and where do you have plans to release them? Maybe turn that over to John.
So we haven't done, like we've discussed since the expansion in 2015, we've focused on cross fostering efforts. And so what we've primarily done is release pups into dens in the currently occupied area. And so where we have plans to release animals in the future, say next year or the year after, is still cross fosters. So the wolves will naturally expand out. Wolves disperse and form packs naturally. And then if they're in an area, say this year, we expect more breeding to happen in the San Mateo Mountains, for instance, in New Mexico. So those animals would be included in our plans. Those breedings would be included, where we have not done cross fosters in the San Mateos prior or releases. So that's how we're approaching it, if that makes sense.
Thanks, John. And right now, I'm not seeing any other questions.
We'll just wait a few more minutes, see if anybody thinks of something.
So it does look like we have another question that just came in. Follow up about the alignment between the recovery plan and 10J rule. In a legal sense, it seems the court order on the 10J rule is clear and repeatedly asserts that this revised section 10J rule must contain provisions based on the available science that led to the conservation and recovery of Mexican gray wolves, independent of the provisions of any non-binding discretionary future plans for achieving recovery. If the recovery plan is discretionary, can the two documents be aligned, legally speaking? Oh, Tracy, do you want to answer that?
Sure. So I guess consider that we have established a population objective and a genetic objective in the regulatory portions of the proposed 10J rule. And both in the rule and the EIS, we discuss kind of some of the science that went into establishing the recovery criteria, again, with those objectives of establishing a population that had a 90% likelihood of persistence over 100 years, and that captured about 90% of the gene diversity in captivity. And so all of the science and data that went into the population viability modeling for the recovery plan in 2016 and 2017, we still consider that to be the best available information for determining what is needed for a robust population of Mexican wolves in the Mexican wolf experimental population area. And so, you know, while we say that we're aligning the two, again, the intention there is just to make sure that the public understands that we are trying to be consistent in the fact that we are reintroducing wolves and managing a wild population, and we're not doing that randomly. We are doing that consistent with our recovery goals for the species. But meanwhile, we have proposed, again, in the regulatory part of the rule, the population objective and the genetic objective, that really is kind of a standalone regulatory piece just of the 10J rule. And as you say, not part of the discretionary non-binding recovery plan.
Thanks, Tracy. And to follow up a little bit on that, typically the recovery plan comes first and followed by a 10J to implement the recovery plan. In our case, we had a 1982 recovery plan that said We're not really sure what recovery looks like for Mexican wolf, so put 100 out on the landscape and then we'll, fix it later. And then we had a 10J following in 1998 that for which we started reintroducing wolves into the wild in the US. And then sometime later, we had a court ruling said we needed to revise that 10J. So we did so in 2015, but in 2015, we didn't have a full recovery plan that said or provided that path to get us to recovery. So there were a lot of, we know we had to update a few things in the recovery plan, and we didn't really have that path toward recovery. So in 2015 10J rule, we added some recovery things in there that typically would be in a recovery plan. The court came back on this revision and said, you need to focus that recovery stuff you put in there is not quite the best. But since the court came back, in the meantime, in 2017, we did create a new recovery plan with all the latest and greatest and scientific information that tells us what we need to do to get to recovery. And so now we're trying to line up the 10J again, or try to line up the 10J with the 2017 recovery, the roadmap that gets us to delisting. And so in some sense, the Fish and Wildlife Service put the cart before the horse by creating a 10J before we knew what recovery looked like. And so that's kind of got us to where we are now and why it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's what we're trying to do, is line the 10J up with the roadmap to get us to recovery, because it is a tool. The 10J is a tool to get us there, but it is not the recovery document. I think we have some additional questions. One is, can you provide any literature that played a significant role in your decision making? And so I'm going to let Tracy answer that one.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say both the proposed 10J rule and the draft supplemental EIS have a list of all the literature cited that we used in the development of those documents. So that would be a great place for you to start. And the 10J literature, if you go into the docket on regulations.gov, there are 4 supporting documents to the proposed rule itself, and the list of literature is one of those. And then in the draft supplemental EIS, it's one of the appendices in the very back of the document that again lists all the literature. But I would say certainly, we relied on, again, the population viability modeling that we had conducted for the recovery plan. We also looked at any published studies. There's one in particular that had come out since the finalization of the recovery plan, just looking at kind of the concepts behind how population modeling can be used to establish recovery criteria for endangered species and specifically for the Mexican wolf. And then, on the EIS side of things, I'll say more broadly than literature. Certainly there is some literature, like there was a new paper related to wolf-human interactions internationally, in terms of whether or not there had been aggressive, dangerous interactions between wolves and people. There's new literature related to disease, but we also used a lot of, so here's what will be more broad than just literature, updated data on things like ungulate population numbers, county data related to economics and the makeup of various populations, price of cattle, all that kind of stuff. So tons of new data coming from the agricultural realm, as well as the state game and fish agencies, as well as our own field data, and also SSP reports, which again, that's the captive population. So all kinds of data and information kind of across all of those different aspects that we had to look at, and they're all available in the 2 documents.
Thank you, Tracy. So are there any other questions? Looks like we have maybe so.
One more coming.
Okay, I see one now. It says, just to clarify my understanding, you currently let wolves roam anywhere they want in Arizona, south of I-40. Your map shows them all in such a small area. I'm not sure what the question is, but I will say that it does look like our wolves are in a small area. Part of that is, and we haven't seen a whole lot of expansion out. One of the differences between the Mexican gray wolves and like the northern gray wolves is that our wolves don't kill each other and get each other out of their territories. Their territories overlap quite a bit. I don't have a good explanation for why that is. My theory is that it's because there's plenty of resources within that territory, and there's no need to kill other wolves and get them out of their territory so far, because there's plenty of food resources down here. Up in Yellowstone, the resources are a little bit more limited, and the wolves will kill each other to get each other out of their territories. And I think it's based upon food availability. And down here in the Southwest, our climate's a little bit warmer and not as harsh. So there's a good resource of prey and elk out there. And so there's not been a real reason for the wolves to like get up and expand out. So they seem to be comfortable being in a smaller area and a smaller territory and overlapping, at least for right now, and haven't really expanded out. But I don't know, John, do you have any other explanations or thoughts on,
No, we've seen some expansion to the north and east in New Mexico. And so again, San Mateo Mountains, Dowdle Mountains, those kind of areas in New Mexico. We haven't seen as the corresponding expansion in Arizona to the west. There may be a wide variety of reasons for that. But I would expect it to happen soon. And just on a note, on south of I-40, there is some phases that are a part of our rule. And so there is a few areas where I think we would remove wolves if they occupied those areas according to our phase 1 and zone 1 rules. And Tracy can probably expand on that a little bit more.
And just to clarify, wolves can occupy all areas south of I-40. There's habitat there, lots of habitat, especially west in Arizona, lots of elk. We expect one day as our population grows, they'll expand out into that area. As John said, we've seen some expansion to the east in New Mexico, but I think Tracy, you may actually have some numbers as far as acreage and areas of expansion since maybe the 2015 rule. Do you have some of that information, Tracy?
I can, look for it here for a minute. I don't have it exactly at my fingertips, but we certainly have seen some expansion. Let's see. So, I thought I had it right here, but maybe I don't. But we have seen some expansion since the 2015 rule over the last 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot, Tracy, as far as the exact numbers of acreage and stuff, but
Yeah, no, that's okay. But we do provide that in both the rule and the draft supplemental EIS in the background of both of those documents, just kind of talking about the status of the population over the last couple of years and its population growth. So I think it went from something like 7 to 18. Didn't it, John? Anyway, yeah. Well, I don't want to guess.
all right, thanks, Tracy. So are there any other questions? I see a question that says, where can I find a map of the limited areas where you will remove wolves south of I-40? John, you want to take that one?
Sure, the phasing portion of the rule, which is, it is in the rule, and it shows that for different stages of time. So it's not that it will always be the case, but it is the case right now. And so it's pretty specific language and pretty for specific areas that change through time. And so it's in the rule. It's been in our 2015 rule until present. And I don't believe there was any changes in that or the timing of it.
I think it's
Tracy,
also important for us to recognize that any tribal lands within the recovery area, tribes can request removal of wolves from tribal lands at any point in time.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie, for that clarification. And our 10J rule and maps are posted on our website. So people can go to our website and find it there.
Yeah, and real quickly, if you are looking in the 2015 10J rule, the map is on page 2564 for phase 1, and then the next couple of pages have the phase maps for phases 2 and 3. So the back end of the rule.
Does anybody have any further questions?
It looks like all, Brady.
All right, guess we're ready to conclude our meeting at this time. So I appreciate everybody attending this evening, and I'd like to close by saying that the service remains committed to collaborative conservation of the Mexican wolf and all listed species. We recognize that future conservation of the subspecies only happens with the continued support of our federal, state, tribal, and local partners. We thank them for their partnership, and we thank all of you for joining us today and for your interest in Mexican wolf. So thank you.
And so Rick has just put on the screen the website location in case you didn't catch it at the top. So take a minute to jot that down if you don't know it already. And with that, we will declare this meeting formally adjourned. We'll leave this up just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll close it up for good. Thank you so much for joining us.